and the senator from Washington for their work on this legislation. And I rise today to say a few words about my amendment to the proposed Keystone Pipeline bill, an amendment that will be coming up for a vote in a few minutes. And I want to thank Senators Bennett, Senator Carper, Senator Leahy, Senator Menendez, Senator Murphy, Senator Warren, and Senator Whitehouse for co-sponsoring this amendment. Mr. President, this amendment is extremely simple. It's about one page, and I'll read it in a moment. But it raises a very, very profound issue as to how we do public policy, not just on issues related to climate, but on issues in general. And that is, as we go forward tackling the very difficult problems facing our country and the world, whom do we listen to? Whose advice do we take as we proceed? And I would argue that historically and appropriately, what we do as a nation is we listen to the experts. That is what we do. And I think that in this debate, when we deal with the Keystone Pipeline, when we deal with the issue of climate change, it is absolutely appropriate that we listen to what the overwhelming percentage of scientists are telling us. You know, Mr. President, I hear some of my colleagues say, well, you know, this is complicated, and I'm not a scientist. I don't know. Well, let me be very, very frank. I am not a scientist, and I did not do terribly well in biology and physics in college. But I can read, and I can listen and understand what the scientific community is saying on this issue. Now, when we go forward as the Senate and we deal with complicated medical issues, when we search for solutions in terms of cancer or heart disease or diabetes, to whom do we go? Who do we listen to for advice as to how we should proceed and allocate public funding? We listen to the doctors and the scientists and the researchers who know a lot more than virtually all of us do in terms of cancer or heart disease. We spend a lot of money in this country on infrastructure, on roads and bridges and wastewater plants and water systems. That's complicated stuff. To whom do we look for advice? Who do we have at our hearings on these issues? We look to the engineers and the scientists who tell us the best way to proceed in terms of how we build roads and bridges in a cost-effective way. We are dealing right now with the issue of cybersecurity, a huge issue, a threat to the nation. To whom do we look for advice? We look to those experts in technology who can tell us the best way to prevent cybersecurity attacks against the United States. And on it goes, whether it's education or whatever it is. Good public policy is dependent upon listening to the scientific community, listening to the people who know the best about this issue. And, Mr. President, in terms of the issue of climate change, the fact of the matter is that the scientific community is virtually unanimous in telling us that climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, that it has already caused devastating problems in the United States and around the world. The scientific community tells us that there is just a brief window of opportunity before the United States and the entire planet suffer irreparable harm. And they tell us that it is imperative that the United States transform its energy system away from fossil fuels and toward energy efficiency and sustainable energy as rapidly as possible. Mr. President, that's not the opinion of Bernie Sanders. That is the opinion of the scientific community. So to those of my colleagues who say, well, you know, it's complicated stuff, I'm not a scientist, I don't know, let me tell you who does know. 37 major American scientific organizations people who study this issue do know. And what they say is that climate change is real, it is caused by human activities, it is already causing devastating problems in the U.S. and around the world, and that we have to transform our energy system. And that is what the Sanders Amendment says. That's all that it says. It is a modest amendment. It is a conservative amendment, simply telling us what the scientific community has told us year after year after year. Mr. President, for those of us who are not scientists, let me tell you the scientific organizations who hold that point of view. They are, among others, the American Anthropological Association, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Chemical Society, the American Geophysical Society, the American Institute of Biological Sciences, the American Meteorological Society, the American Physical Society, the National Academy of Engineering, the National Academy of Sciences. 37 separate scientific organizations, including those that were mentioned. But that's not all. There are 135 international scientific organizations that say the same thing. And, Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent to place into the record a list of 135 international scientific organizations, 37 American scientific organizations, 21 medical associations that all agree with the basic premises that are in the Sanders Amendment.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is the leading international scientific body that deals with climate change. And let me quote to you what they said just last fall, and I quote, "Warming of the climate system is unequivocal, as is now evident from observations of increases in global average air and ocean temperatures, widespread melting of snow and ice, and rising global average sea level," end of quote. Mr. President, more than 97% of the scientific community in the United States and across the globe agrees with these findings. Mr. President, I am going to conclude my remarks by simply reading my amendment. Make sure that every member of the Senate understands how simple and straightforward and non-controversial this amendment is. And this is what it says. Quote, "It is the sense of Congress that Congress is in agreement with the opinion of virtually the entire worldwide scientific community that climate change is real. 2, that climate change is caused by human activities. 3, that climate change has already caused devastating problems in the United States and around the world. 4, that a brief window of opportunity exists before the United States and the entire planet suffer irreparable harm. And 5, that it is imperative that the United States transform its energy system away from fossil fuels and toward energy efficiency and sustainable energy as rapidly as possible." That's it. That is the entire amendment. And every provision in this amendment is supported by virtually the entire scientific community, the people who best understand this issue. Mr. President, clearly we are a nation divided politically, and clearly we are a Congress divided politically. We have different views on almost every issue. But I would hope very much that the United States Senate does not reject science, because in doing so would not only lead to bad public policy, but it would be an embarrassment before the entire world that the United States Senate is rejecting what the overwhelming majority of scientists are telling us about what they consider to be one of the great crises facing our planet. So, Mr. President, I would hope very much that we would have for this amendment strong bipartisan support in the Senate that says, as a Senate, we are going to listen to what the scientific community tells us, and that we are going to develop public policy based on their knowledge and that information. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.